Hi everyone, I want to read to you today from Luke chapter 8. And it says this: Jesus and his followers crossed the lake of Galilee to the area of the Gerasean people. When Jesus got out the boat, a man from the town who had demons inside of him, a demoniac, came to Jesus. For a long time he had worn no clothes and he'd lived in burial caves, not in a house. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him. He said with a loud voice, "What do you want with me? Jesus, Son of the Most High God, I beg you, don't torture me." Now what's interesting is that Jesus was actually casting the spirit of this unclean spirit out of this man. It says in verse 29, he said this because Jesus was commanding the evil spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had taken hold of him. So he said it because Jesus was actually doing something good for him. Many times it had taken hold of him, though he had been kept under guard and chained hand and foot. He had broken his chains and had been forced by the demon out into a lonely place. Now I want us to think just for a few seconds of how many things in our lives have forced us out into a lonely place. It says in this passage that the man didn't even stay in a house. He was living in a burial ground, burial caves at the time. Now, nowadays we often talk about having demons. We say, "Oh, I've got demons, he's got demons," and we mean things from the past that are affecting our future. Problems that affect the way we think about an issue. That's why we behave in strange ways. But there are things called actual spiritual demons in the Bible, and I want to say to you today that whether you have actual demons like this man or you've got demons like we talk about nowadays, they always seem to force us into the place of death, don't they? Depression, anxiety, bad memories, all these things, trauma, all the things that cause us to act in ways that we wouldn't usually want to not be able to get over things, they take us to a lonely place. They seem to shrivel up our lives and cause death and not life inside of us at all. We seem to go on shopping trips or out for parties or holidays or days out. We buy things, some people eat. We might get involved in sport, whatever we can to get away from these demons that affect our lives. So this man was taken in what seems to be like an insanity, really, to live in caves. This demon took over him, even when it was bound, even when they tried to help him, to tie him down, to stop this going on. He just broke those chains. And I know for a fact, in my life, when I've had demons on issues, I've tried and I've tried and I've tried to get over it, and sometimes it seems like I'm over it and sometimes it seems like it's gone, but it always seems to come back. And I know that's the same for everybody until something happens that finally deals with that issue. And this man met Jesus, and Jesus was going to deal with that issue. But because Jesus was dealing with the issue, the man starts going, "What are you doing? What do you want from me? Don't torture me." Because he's frightened. Here's this man that's come across the lake, and it was probably quite possible that this demoniac had never heard of Jesus. He'd never heard of this man who's going around doing great and wonderful things for people. And so here comes this Jesus, and he's going to take from this man something he's had for a long time. Now the story goes that as he's casting out these demons, he asks the demons their name, and they say Legion, which means a whole host of demons, an army of demons. So the demons beg Jesus not to send them to hell, really. And so Jesus says, "Okay, see those pigs over there? You can go into those pigs." Now the pigs then, once the demons go into them, run down the hill and die in the water. So the herdsmen see this happening, and they run to the town and all the countryside around, and they tell everybody. So everybody comes to see this Jesus who has healed the demoniac. So they come, and what I was taught was that the people were angry because, well, of course they'd be angry. This herd of pigs went down the hill into the water. And so they're angry and they want rid of Jesus, and they tell Jesus, "Go, we don't want anything to do with you, don't want you here because you're killing our animals." But actually, if you read it from Luke anyway, it says something very different. It actually says when the herdsmen saw what had happened, they ran and told about this in the town and the countryside, and people went to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man sitting at Jesus' feet, clothed and in his right mind, because the demons were gone, but the people were afraid. The people who saw this happen told the others how Jesus had made the man well. All the people of the Gerasean country asked Jesus to leave because they were very afraid. So Jesus got into the boat and went back to Galilee. So, why did they ask him to leave? Not because they were angry, they were afraid. Now, maybe they were afraid that he was going to kill all the other animals, but it doesn't matter. The point is, they were frightened. They were frightened of Jesus. They were frightened of his power. They were frightened, even though they saw that he'd done something good for that person, they were frightened of the effect that was going to have on them. And they were probably also frightened of the power, because it says they tried to tie this man down. They tried to fix it themselves and they couldn't. And along comes something greater, something they don't understand. And all of a sudden, the man is better. And it scares them. So Jesus goes across the water, and then we get a different picture. It says, when Jesus got back to Galilee, a crowd had been waiting for him. So one lot of people sends him away and the other lot of people are waiting for him. And then it says, and a man named Jairus, a leader of the synagogue, came to Jesus and fell at his feet, begging him. What a difference. One group were begging him to go, the other group, or the other man, was begging him to come, and it says, begging him to come to his house. Jairus' only daughter, about 12 years old, was dying. So we have a man who was living in death, living in a graveyard, living in a lonely place, not being able to get on with his life, who is healed, and the people go, get out, because we're frightened. And then you've got a man whose daughter is going to the lonely place, going to the graveyard, and he's going, come, 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 because he's not frightened. He believes Jesus can do something. And it says, while Jesus was on his way to Jairus' house, the people were crowding all around him. A woman was in the crowd who had been bleeding for 12 years, hemorrhaging for 12 years. But no one was able to heal her. Here we go again. The demoniac, no one could tie him down, no one could help him. Jairus' daughter, no one could stop her from dying, or they would have done. And this woman, nobody could heal her either. 3 people with 3 impossible situations. 1 Jesus. Let's see what happens. So she came behind Jesus and touched the edge of his coat, and instantly her bleeding stopped. Then Jesus said, who touched me? All the people said that they had not touched him. And Peter said, Master, the people are all around you and are pushing against you. But Jesus said, someone did touch me, because I felt power go out of me. When the woman saw she could not hide, she came forward shaking and fell down before Jesus while all the people listened. She told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Now here is some very important points. This woman was deemed unclean. When a woman was bleeding back then with her monthly period, she was unclean, and she was unclean for a number of days. Well, this woman had been bleeding for 12 years. She was unclean, and yet she has no fear of touching Jesus. She's no fear of being in that crowd. She thinks, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, I'm going to be clean. She's not frightened of him. She received the same power that the demoniac received, and the people around the demoniac were then frightened of that power. But this woman is not frightened to tell in front of everyone why she touched Jesus. She literally goes, I was unclean. Hey, not anymore, because I touched him. And she says it in front of everyone. Now, sometimes we have people that we deem unclean coming into our churches, coming into our lives. We talk about them. We say, you can't be this and Christian, and if you're doing that, well, you're not really walking with the Lord. And we seem to judge them. Jesus healed her. And she didn't feel frightened to touch Jesus, because there was no one there at that time, it seemed, who had noticed that this unclean woman was about to touch their Jesus. There was no one there to say, you're unclean, you're not allowed to minister, you're not allowed to serve. And she touches him. But what happens? You can't touch Jesus, really and truly touch Jesus, when you're unclean without becoming clean. Because he's going to clean you up, and he's going to make you well, and he's going to heal you if you truly are walking and touching him. So let them come in. Let them worship him. Let them touch him. Let them meet Jesus, and let us do the same, for we are all sheep who have gone astray, and we are all unclean, and we all have our struggles, but it's him who deals with them. So she's not frightened. And then Jesus says to her, now she's just made this proclamation in front of everyone, I was unclean, I was bleeding for 12 years and I touched you. I touched you, Jesus, when I was unclean. And instead of me making you unclean, which is what the law would have said, you made me clean. You made me well. You made me better. Jesus touched things that no Israelite should have touched. There's a law in the Old Testament that says you shouldn't touch death. You shouldn't touch someone who's dead because they're unclean. Well, Jesus in a few minutes goes and touches this girl who has apparently died. And let's look at that. But verse 48 says, Jesus said to her, dear woman, you are made well because you believed. Go in peace. And that's interesting because the other people sent him away because they were afraid. But this woman is made clean because she believed. Reading on, it says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of the synagogue leader and said to him, your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. When Jesus heard this, he said to Jairus, do not be afraid, just believe, and your daughter will be well. When Jesus went to the house, he let only Peter, James and John and the girl's father and mother go in with him. All the people were crying and feeling sad because the girl was dead. But Jesus said, stop crying, she is not dead, only asleep. The people laughed at Jesus because they knew the girl was dead. But Jesus took hold of her hand and called her, my child, stand up. Her spirit came back into her and she stood up at once. Then Jesus ordered that she be given something to eat. The parents were amazed, but Jesus told them, do not tell anyone what has happened. And so Jesus touches an unclean woman. And so we have three accounts of three different people. We have the demoniac who's living in death, can't get away from it, and Jesus comes and gives him life back spiritually. Comes and deals with the demons, and the man's afraid, he's frightened. What are you doing with me? What are you doing with me? And Jesus goes, I'm taking away the problem. But then you have the people around the demoniac, and they're frightened, and so they send Jesus away. And Jesus goes. He doesn't say, no, I want to do something good. He's shown what he wants to do, but they are frightened, and fear will send God away from us. Hebrews says that we must believe that God is a good God and a God who rewards those who seek him. If we won't believe he's a good God, then number one, we're not going to seek him, and number two, we're not going to want him, and the fear of him will send him away. I want you to think for a moment of me being in the forest on my own here. Now, I'm a lady in the forest on my own, and if a big man with big muscles was walking towards me right now, I might think to myself, he's looking right at me, he's walking right towards me, and I might be frightened. And so I think the best thing to do is gather up all my stuff and go, because he could rape me, he could hurt me, he could attack me. But what if he's walking towards me and I notice, oh, it's my brother, or oh, it's my friend, or oh, it's my dad? I'm not going to gather up my stuff and go because I know the person. Our image of God really matters because God is really powerful and he does magnificent things, and in life things can happen that we just don't understand. You know, Jesus said before going to the cross, you couldn't do this to me if the Father had not given you authority. Jesus knew that whatever came to him, God had allowed, therefore he could accept it and he could rely on God even in the midst of horrible situations when a lot of people would go, you can't be a good God because look what's happening to me. Jesus still knew he was a good God. Job, when all those things happened to him, his family killed, cattle gone, house destroyed, sitting on the ground, boils all over his body. His wife says, curse God and die. Job says, no, I won't curse God because I know my Redeemer lives, and one day he will walk upon my earth. In other words, I know who he is, and although these circumstances are happening, I know who my God is. I know him. So the people who sent Jesus away were frightened of him because they didn't know who he was. They didn't know really what his power was there to do. Jesus came not to condemn the world, it says that clearly, but to save the world. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him may not perish but have eternal life. Jesus was there to give life, and life in all of its fullness. Jesus was there to show them the glory of God. He was a direct representation of the Father. He was the Logos, which means the communication. He came as a communication from God to show what God is truly like, to represent God. He only did what God said. He only said what God said and only did what God told him to do. Or he copied what he saw his Father doing. And these people were frightened of him. They had clearly in front of them a sign of his power, what he wanted to achieve, the good that he wanted to do, but they were scared of that power because they didn't know the person. So it's so important that when we're seeking God, we don't just seek the power, but we seek the person, because it's the person who is going to keep us trusting in life. It is the person who we are going to be able to go to when things go wrong and when things go bad, and we're going to be able to go, I trust you. I trust you because I know who you are. So then Jairus, he goes over, the people are waiting for him, and he meets on his way to Jairus' house another unclean person. Now, the demoniac came upon Jesus' path, shall we say, and he just happened to be there and Jesus dealt with it. The woman who was unclean should never have been touched by Jesus. Jesus should never have been in contact with her, just like he should never have been in contact with a man living among death. But she touches Jesus. So she comes up, she touches Jesus, same thing happens. She becomes clean. Then in front of everyone, she too has the boldness to say, I was that woman that was bleeding. Then he goes to Jairus' daughter. Now, Jesus should never have touched death. But although he says she's just sleeping, we know that it clearly says her spirit came back into her. So she was dead, but he gave her life. And he touches her. So in the first instance, he comes up against death and uncleanness, and he deals with it. The second instance, death or uncleanness touches him, and he deals with it. The third instance, he deliberately goes to death or uncleanness, and he deals with it. And in the third instance, he actually says, my child. Because the whole point is that this person behind the power is the Father of the whole human race. He is our creator and he loves us. So, our uncleanness is not bigger than the love of God. The love of God and the worth of Christ is bigger than your uncleanness and my uncleanness. And there is nothing to fear. You know, the same action can be used to give a hug as to strangle someone, or to suffocate someone, or to crush someone. The same action can be used to give the Heimlich maneuver and to remove a blockage from a windpipe and save someone's life, as can be to squeeze someone to death and crush them. The difference is the character and the desire behind the power. And this is the same with God. God loves us, and whatever he is doing in our lives, even when it seems that everything is wrong, if we know him, we can trust him, because we know who he is, and we know he is a good God, and a God who rewards those who seek him. How do we seek him? How do we get those rewards? Check out the video on Teach Me to Pray, Lord, because that will tell you a little bit about how we get that promise. But what I want us to remember today is Jesus said so many times, do not be afraid. Trust in God. Only believe. The woman believed, that's why she touched him. Jairus believed, that's why he went for Jesus. And the man, Jesus gave him great reason to believe, didn't he? He said to him, don't be frightened. So when something happens in life and you cry out and you say, what are you doing with me, Lord? I want you to remember that he's loving you. He is loving you. And you can trust him, even when you're afraid. Do not be afraid. Only believe, because your Heavenly Father is a good God and a rewarder of those who seek him. Take care.